I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: why has the public discourse become so hostile? Whether it's small issues or big issues, it seems that more and more we have become incapable of having discussions in a way that doesn't turn to hostility. And when you do see one of those discussions, those rare discussions about big, important and serious issues, that doesn't resort into a slinging match or just a bunch of ad hominem and ugly slurs and insults and playing to the crowd, it's quite a refreshing thing. So, for example, the recent debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, where both men disagreed very, very strongly with each other and they made their views known very clearly, but they did it with an absolute civility and charity that was really quite refreshing. The problem is that it shouldn't be refreshing, it should be the norm. I think there's a couple of factors that are feeding this problem. First of all, we have a very entrenched victim mentality now with a lot of people, and this victim mentality is actually being actively fostered very commonly on university campuses. It is more and more common to encounter this sort of victim mentality, this view that someone who disagrees with me is in some way engaging in a serious act of victimization, especially if it's about some of the big issues or the issues that I consider myself to be so passionately connected to. It's like we've got a group of people, for whatever reason, whether they've formed their identity around these issues or whether it's just the fact that they've been mollycoddled so much that they have this belief that their view is the only one, or maybe relativism plays into it. They don't have a concept of objective truth anymore. This desire to perhaps collectivize everything. For whatever reason, there is a victim mentality now, and that doesn't help to have a rational and civil discourse, because if you've got an issue being discussed and one side of the debate views themselves as being victimized, and victimized quite seriously, simply by having someone else disagree with them, then you can see how that's going to get hostile very, very quickly. But it's not just the victim mentality. There is also a lack of empathy, and this lack of empathy is on all sides of issues when they are being discussed. And I think that social media is a big reason why this lack of empathy actually exists. It's not just social media, but I think social media is helping to fuel this in a big way. Underpinning what social media is doing here is there is a breakdown of community. And so generally we don't now engage with people beyond our own little, silo, beyond our own echo chamber, our own bubble. And social media helps to reinforce the echo chamber. It doesn't really encourage us to get outside of the echo chamber. The social media algorithms deliberately watch what we are clicking and reading and viewing and liking and disliking, and then they feed us more of the content that we want to see. So effectively they are pulling us further and further down the ideological rabbit hole. They are creating an even narrower echo chamber for us to live in. And if you're not getting off social media enough, and you are relying on social media as your sort of primary vehicle and primary way of getting information about the world, then you are going to be in more and more of an echo chamber the more time that you spend on that. The problem, of course, with that is that you're not engaging regularly enough to form, I think, a good basis for empathy with people who are outside of your bubble. You're not really hearing other views presented by the people who hold those other views. Instead, you are hearing those views presented by people who are already in your way of thinking. And one of the problems with that is that there tends to be a caricature of the opposition that goes on, often a mischaracterization of the people who hold those views and the views that they actually hold, because it's far easier to actually engage in insults and name calling than it is to actually fairly represent someone's view, understand accurately what they believe, and then respond with reason to what they believe. It's just far easier to ridicule them, to call them a name, to reduce them to a caricature, and that's often what happens within our own echo chambers. We are all guilty of doing this at times, sometimes more than others, but we are all guilty of doing this, and it's really important that we're on guard against it. The thing about social media too is that you have this issue of online disinhibition effect, that when we get online, we tend not to see persons. As the name suggests, our inhibitions go right out the window. One way they do this is the fact that we think when we're online that often we're engaging with no one else really watching what we're doing. So we tend to say and do things that we wouldn't do if that sort of shame factor was present, if there were other people or we had a sense that other people were seeing us do these things. The other way the online disinhibition effect works is the fact that we don't have our usual empathy controls and mechanisms in place because we are engaging with pixels, and so we tend to miss the fact that it's actually a person who's on the receiving end of what we're about to say. It's a person who we're either dialoguing with or talking about. And so we don't hear their voice, we don't see their face, and so those usual empathy mechanisms and controls, very often they just go right out the window, and so we say and do things that we would never ever say or do. We go a lot further. This is why cyberbullying is just such a worse form of bullying, because people go much further than they would as if the person was actually standing there in front of them, or they could hear their voice or see their face. And so this is just contributing to a very toxic and hostile way of engaging over issues. I think we're in a place now in our history where we actually need like a form of social activism, a social movement, if you like, a movement for social change that actually promotes, I guess, like a new manners movement or a positive social discourse, a form of activism that's promoting civil and charitable activism. That we actually engage with people, not just with positions, not just with politics. So too much now, I think we are, instead of seeing a person, we are seeing their political affiliations and the positions that they hold on issues first and foremost, and then we colour everything through those two lenses and forget the fact that this is a human person. And I think if we want to recover a civil charitable discourse, and I think that's urgent, by the way, because the breeding ground that we've got right now, the sort of environment, the public square, is very fertile for political violence or for philosophical violence to arise, because effectively the next stage beyond hostile and angry speech at other people is you actually start getting physically hostile with people, and we are already seeing examples of that. One thing I don't think that's probably helped us here is the way in which we often talk about a culture war. And in a sense, that is true. There is a war going on, an ideological war, but the talk of a culture war has tended us to think of this in terms of a sort of a military hostile engagement with people. And I think it's not a good place to start. I much prefer to talk about perhaps cultural disagreement, cultural clash, to try and think of it in those terms, so that I actually see persons in this, and that I don't sort of start off on a war footing. I actually try and start from a basis of conversation and dialogue. It's not about tribalism, it's about trying to engage with people. And empathy is absolutely key. And here's the thing, if you are interested in winning people over to your side, if you believe that you are espousing the truth on any given issue, then empathy has got to be your gateway drug. It's got to be the thing you give away for free that opens the gate to the truth that you believe. That's the thing that's going to win people over in the most effective way possible. But if you're constantly hostile, you view yourself as being at a war footing, you have no empathy, a lot less people are actually going to be interested in even hearing what you have to say, because straight away they don't like the way in which you're engaging with them. And this is true of all of us, and it's something I think we've got to be on guard against. Like I said, I think we need a renewed focus on this. We need a movement that really pushes and encourages us to rediscover empathy. But I think ultimately the only way that's actually going to succeed is if we actually rediscover community. And that means actually getting offline more often. I mean, social media is a great tool. I love it. The ability to communicate with people, and it opens up doors that are excellent, but it also has some pitfalls that we've got to be very aware of. And one of the things is spending too much time on social media, getting stuck in too much of an echo chamber, and not living beyond that. We've got to spend more time offline than we do online, and that's the only way we recover community. The other thing I think we've got to do is we've actually got to read and gain information beyond just social media and the internet. A lot of people, and I see this particularly with new atheists, a lot of new atheists are stuck in a very narrow field of inquiry. And what happens is they read their Sam Harris, and they watch their Sam Harris, and they have a bit of Christopher Hitchens, and they have some Dawkins in there, and they think they've got everything. That's a very, very narrow, in fact it's far too narrow a field of inquiry. You've got to go beyond that. You've got to actually read books. You've got to read sources. You can't just take such a narrow field of view on these issues. One thing I try and do is I try and read for an hour a day. It's been a little bit slack lately, but I try and do that. And I find that's helped me in a wide variety of sources. And what I'm finding by doing that is I'm actually engaging in a more comprehensive way with issues. I'm getting a much bigger field of view on these things. And that really helps a lot. Not just with giving me a broader knowledge, but also with empathy and understanding more accurately exactly where people are coming from. Look, I've lost count of the times that I have heard new atheists just espouse absolute nonsense that is not held by the majority of religious people. It's because they have this very narrow field of view. And they have this very simplistic way of looking at these issues, and they sort of cherry pick off them the worst examples. They don't bother to look beyond that to see what else might be out there. They don't ask the bigger questions that really matter. They get stuck in a very narrow field of view. But the thing is, it's not just new atheists. All of us can be guilty of that, and we've all got to be careful about falling into that trap. Like I said, I think this has become more urgent than ever before, because unfortunately the next step in this sort of public environment tends to be a public environment where things actually start to get physically violent, and that's not a good thing. We need to rediscover empathy. We need a renewed focus and strengthening of community, genuine human community. And one of the ways you can do that, I would say, is get offline and start making friends with people who come from different stratas of society, who have different views, have different political ideas to you, and form genuine self-giving friendship with them. And you might be surprised at how fruitful that actually is. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon or PayPal. There is a link for both in the description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you next week on The Daily Question.